All right, so today's Monday, August 25th, and we've got 3 topics that hit your personal life. Today, we're talking about zero-day exploits on mobile devices. If you have an iPhone, you're definitely going to want to listen in. The next topic is going to be hardware-based attacks, but specifically webcams. So if you're working remote, you don't have to go into an office, but you're using that webcam, there's some things that you might not be aware of and how it could affect your security. The last thing, we're talking about ATM and network breaches. Everyone spends money, but when you go to the ATM, should you be worried?
All right, this is episode 17 of the DTF Cyber Podcast. I'm Damian.
This is Troy.
And it's your boy, Fern. Let's go. I've been using an iPhone since Christmas because Verizon had a special package. I got like 6 iPhones in my house now with Apple Watches.
Yeah, new convert.
Yeah, I'm new to the ecosystem, and now I have a MacBook Pro, right? And my kids have iPads. Like, we're full ecosystem. But today, or not today, last week actually, there's some interesting things that came out about Apple zero-day exploits.
Yeah, but those aren't new. I think 0 days happen all the time.
Well, so hang on, let me take a step back, because what I've come to maybe assume is that people say Apple devices are more secure than Windows. That's the baseline that I'm working off of. So when you tell me that my iPhone has a zero-day exploit, my first thought is, well, what the hell just happened, right?
Oh, let me stop you there.
Okay, go.
When's the last time you saw a Windows phone?
No. Touche.
No, there was. Remember this, Troy? I don't know. It's probably before Fern was even born.
Probably.
Baby Fern.
Okay. So,
Yeah, I think it's a misnomer, honestly. I think that people assume that Mac has no viruses or no malware or no 0 days, but the reality is that hackers just find an easy playground in other operating systems to go after. Mac is more difficult, but they are there. We saw this, especially with the iPhone, with the Pegasus malware that was used to surveil journalists around the world. And so there are 0 days for Apples, and there are ones for targeted specific people at the right level that nation states are trying to get after. So you have to be vigilant, keeping that iPhone up to date. There's new updates out this week. So definitely a possibility.
Yeah. And I think one thing that Apple does is they lock down their Apple store versus like Android and the Google store. That's a little bit more open. So I think that's probably where that's coming from. But it, like Troy is saying, it's not necessarily any safer. These 0 days are going to be there. I think the question is, how fast do individuals take to update their software on their phones?
Mm-hmm.
And within the business, how is that mandated, right? Are there companies using MDMs? And if they're not using that mobile device management system and you're allowing their users to just use their personal phones, what are the gaps there?
Well, one of the most frustrating things, if you working on a laptop, computer, whatever, is the update. Because Windows updates take forever, right? You might want to do that on your way home, right? So it kills a lot of productivity. If you show up at 8 o'clock in the morning, you do a Windows update, you might be back on your PC at noon, right? So you've kind of burned the morning. But for phones, a lot of times Apple, now that I have an Apple, will just automatically do it. It will just keep telling you, hey, we need to do this, right?
Or they do it when you're sleeping.
Yeah, do it overnight, right? But not everyone has an iOS, right? I don't know how some of the other OSs work, but they might just be directly to, overnight. But maybe the question that I have is, what happens if you just keep delaying it because you don't do it overnight, you don't remember to do it, but should I be worried?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
I mean, let's take this back into not just the phone, right? Here's a perfect example. In my browser, I probably have 100 tabs open at any one time. So I never want to reboot that browser to take the update. And I think that's really frustrating that now Chrome is a little bit better. It does refresh all your browsers tabs and brings you back.
Yeah.
But it's still a pain, right? Even though it's like a shut down the browser, bring it right back up to be on the latest. But there's a risk there if you don't do it soon enough.
Like what? Tell me. Like,
well, I don't know this specific 0 day and what the consequences are.
Okay.
But obviously, my phone's patched. I mean, I'll check it right now. I'm pretty sure it's patched. Is yours patched?
I believe so. I think when I woke up the other day, it said it had updated.
It updated.
Yeah. So that's why it's kind of nice because it automatically does it for me. Right.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people will have this mantra of, look, somebody hacking my phone is kind of rare. It's not going to happen. But it doesn't mean it can't happen. There's still an element of risk there.
Yeah. Maybe the issue is just more so just not necessarily mobile devices, because iPhones obviously might just do it on its own. But if a business doesn't have certain procedures in place, so Mike, for example, he always has, it's not necessarily a joke, but he said it multiple times that I've heard from him directly is, a lot of times he's on a sales phone call because he has a lot of, meetings with vendors that he works with. And he always says that his one test, the litmus test to understand how secure these salespeople are, is if they share their screen and there's a little red dot on their Google browser, because that lets him know that they haven't updated or patched something. So it's kind of like a litmus test on, well, is this organization doing what they need to be secure? Because if I work with them, I might put myself at risk, right? So that's kind of interesting, but not every business has people that set these policies in place, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that patching is one of the biggest challenges we have. And, a lot of these enterprise patching systems will give you 1 day notice, and then it'll be a 2-hour notice, and then it gets down to 15 minutes. And no matter what you do, it's going to restart. So thankfully, we can actually force that, because a lot of users that have a lot of tabs open don't want to restart, and they'll definitely wait. But, the thing about Google Chrome that you mentioned, the little red dot, is so interesting because not every enterprise manages the browser. In other words, they manage the overall operating system, but some of the third-party applications like the browser are not managed by the enterprise, so they can't force the update. And so we know that Google can be set to auto-update, which I set mine to, but sometimes it doesn't take effect until you restart the browser or restart the computer. And so it's very important that you look at this holistically. How do I make sure that not only am I patching Windows or Mac, how am I patching all those third-party applications on top of that stack?
So wait, so you said that, so when you had to automatically do it for Google, that's a setting you did on your device. It wasn't enforced by a business or security of the business, right?
Right. So you can choose that setting yourself. I think out of the box, Google chooses to auto update itself. So that setting may be already set for you. But if the enterprise manages the browser, they can actually force the update through the system, and the user cannot, delay that or stop it.
Okay. So that's good to know.
Yeah. Well, most times those tools will allow you to defer the update. Mm-hmm. And then there's a deadline. So it may say you have 3 deferrals, but by Friday at this time, it's going to reboot. So you may as well do it at your earliest convenience. Because the last thing you want is to be in the middle of a meeting and have your machine tell you it's rebooting right now. Mandatory update.
Yeah, you're on an all hands meeting where you have to present to the board. All of a sudden, computer restarts, right? Yeah, so if people are using Google browsers, right? Or they're using third-party applications, there are ways to enforce updates, right?
Unmanaged devices.
Okay.
Right? Which is back to what I said about mobile devices. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's ways to manage mobile devices. They could be company issued. They could be personally owned, but still have management capabilities where a portion of that phone can be managed. And then the updates will have to be mandated. Mm-hmm. But then there's a whole population of mobile devices that work inside of an organization that are never managed. They're just personally owned. And so you kind of have to measure those gaps and those risks.
This was the BYOD discussion back in the day. Do we allow, employees to bring their own device? And then how do we secure company data on those? And I know that, as you mentioned, certain software vendors, like who you get your email through, can manage the data that you have so that when I leave the company, they can erase all that company data immediately. Imagine if you allow employees to just bring their own device and sync their work email to that device, and then they walk out the door with all those emails and all the content from those emails. It's a big risk.
Well, wasn't there something recently where some like OneDrive was connected between business and personal devices, like within the last like 3 months?
That's actually quite common, right? So if you're looking at securing, let's say OneDrive or Google Drive, one thing that people forget to think about is that if you allow OneDrive, you could have different instances of OneDrive. And so if I'm a student, I might have OneDrive for the university, and I may also have OneDrive for my organization.
So like a profile within OneDrive. So like you have...
Well, it's really called it's instance awareness, like understanding which instance is sanctioned and approved and which one's not. And they should probably have 2 different types of policies.
Okay.
But we kind of, a lot of organizations will just put that into one bucket and say, oh, well, OneDrive is authorized, it's sanctioned, not realizing that you have these different instances.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I could see how, someone could upload something to the wrong OneDrive, right?
Yeah, that happens all the time. Upload to the wrong one or back up to the wrong one. I think that's very common.
And then if you have a malicious insider, it could be intentional, right? So they're taking it and they're taking it from the company drive and putting it in their personal drive so they can get it outside the walls of the company.
Yeah. Think about somebody who's leaving their current job. Well, what's the first thing they want to do?
Take what they need.
Take what they need, or take what they think they're going to need, or just take everything, copy it over.
Yeah. And so maybe if you have an MDM solution in place, right? Whether it's bring your own device, right, with the MDM, or if a company issue device with that on there, you kind of prevent a lot of these DLP issues.
I think it's, again, depends in layers. So the MDM will help make sure that maybe data or applications being installed on that device don't interfere with security at the corporate level. But then with some of these, data transfers happening, there's other solutions that you'll have to look at to really give you visibility into the movement of where data is coming from, where it's going to in transit.
So I've got a kind of, not a bone to pick, we won't call it that, but I will say I'm a little suspicious of what people can see, because last week or the week before we talked about VPNs, right? And why should people care about, if they use a free VPN service versus a paid one, right? And who can see that traffic? In a similar adjacent scenario, I can imagine where people that are not in tech, right, maybe don't understand what these vendors can do, what they're capable of. Maybe as an average person, it feels like someone's spying on me, right? Because if you install an application on my phone, I kind of expect, just by nature of Facebook or Instagram, pulling contacts, you give them permission, right? But pulling contacts, understanding what you're searching for, and then kind of using that for ads, I think part of me, maybe it's just average Fern, might expect that there is some level of privacy that people do not get, right? So maybe a lot of people just don't want to put a work, maybe like a segmentation on their phone.
Yeah, and that's completely understandable.
But is it warranted?
Well, no, I do see a lot of people that carry 2 phones for that purpose.
Okay. So they do it because they want to separate work and personal.
Yes.
But
and if you have employees in the European Union, by the way, there's a lot of policies inside the European Union that actually go against putting mobile device management on employees' personal devices. So if you do have employees there, it's very important that you kind of get that sorted before you demand that they install this monitoring app on their phone. It's very much against some of the European regulations. So there is a privacy concern. Employees have that. And so the answer to that is companies need to buy that second device if they want their employee to have access to data after hours. But then if you think about it, some countries like France have this policy that you can't email your employees after they leave work to give them that work-life balance. It's very similar with what we're saying here is like, the companies are taking advantage of employees using their personal device to access work resources 24/7. So are you really getting paid for what you are, how many hours you're working? So there's a big concern about that as well.
Yeah, but I think most people at certain points are salaried, right? And it's kind of it's not like an hourly work. Like they're not on a factory floor doing certain things.
I agree with that, but I think there is some creep, right? So you say, well, I don't care, I'm on salary. I work 40, 60, 80 hours a week, whatever it is. But there becomes this, expectation that you're going to work 60, 80 hours a week when you really committed to working for 40 hours a week for that salary. And so, if you're going to work 60 hours a week, you should be getting paid something different. So that's a whole different discussion than what we're talking about here. But I think that it's important to note that as you look at monitoring of what you're doing on your personal device outside the hours of work, there's a lot of facets to that diamond.
Yeah. And look, don't take what Troy's saying as Troy only works 40 hours a week, because I know he works a lot longer than that. I don't think we're generalizing cybersecurity work specifically, because obviously if you're in this field, there's other arrangements.
Yeah.
Because you're not a 9-to-5 worker, right? Mm-hmm. But there is another workforce that are not IT or cyber, and they may carry a phone for their job.
And some of the concerns about the hours, Damian, I was talking about, I hear from some of the, put back from the European Union regulations is why they were put in place for totally different industries, not ours. Obviously, I feel like, when I left police work, I was on call 24/7 for that, and I'm on call 24/7 for this. So it's very similar, feeling that this is a mission and we are on 24/7, and I'm okay with that. But what I'm talking about is some of those employees that have a whole different vision of what the expectation of privacy is.
So let's go back to that. If I have a personal device and my business doesn't want to buy a second device, like I'm in the US and my company wants me to add an MDM to my phone. As a basic user, should I have privacy concerns, or do I just expect that the MDM provider draws that distinction on what's personal, what's not, based on how I use it? Or is it like the VPN situation where I don't know if, all my TikTok scrolling is going to show up as a metric of, during work hours, this person was on TikTok, right? I don't personally know. So I'm just kind of wondering, is that a valid concern that people should have?
It depends on your organization. So I can't answer that because I don't know every organization. I would tell you, me personally, I would probably have concerns, right? And I'd carry 2 phones.
Okay.
There's a balance there, for sure. But I'm just ultra paranoid, right? I don't, like I mentioned before, I don't give my real name at Starbucks. I don't give my real name in an Uber. So, having something on my phone, I'd probably be a little bit paranoid. But I do know how some of these MDMs work, and there is separation.
Okay.
Right. So, as somebody who's been an administrator in some of these tools, I know for a fact that you cannot see certain activities, or certain applications.
Same here. I second that as well. Just as an administrator, you can see that, but you really have to have a lot of trust in your organization to do the right things, right? So they could potentially take advantage of that. I mean, just any malicious insider could take advantage of administrative rights and, try to pry into areas they shouldn't when they have that kind of power over your device, because these mobile device management applications really get, side loaded, and they jailbreak your phone and they now have control of it. You have to trust that the administrators have tuned it to look at the things they need to look at, not what they want to look at.
Okay. I think I'm just more so just curious, because there are a lot of businesses or owner-operator businesses, like maybe specifically, where they really kind of have a watchful eye on their employees, because they want to say, how are people actually busy, right? And then there's tools out there that monitor how someone is using their computer, and if the actions are consistent with productive work or a mouse jiggler, right? So not that everyone does that, not that everyone is doing that.
No, but we talked about this before. It's always, if you're delivering on what a work product and that's being accomplished, I don't think anyone's going to really go look at, what's this person doing every 5 minutes.
No. I maybe like how you said you're paranoid. I'm thinking, well, what if someone's paranoid about, what their employer is doing, whether or not they trust them, right? Whether they trust their employer, right? And so it's just more so the thought process of, well, should people think about these things?
I don't think it's necessarily, do you trust your employer, as much as, hey, somebody could get into the system and be unauthorized and then take advantage of that. And they would have access to that data potentially, right? So it's not necessarily a rogue administrator, but maybe their credentials got lost, right? We've seen past episodes, we're talking about passwords getting stolen, credentials getting stolen. Right?
Yeah.
So it's more than just trust of your employer. So, I mean, but back to the original point, right? These 0 days happen, and I feel like they're happening more and more frequently.
Yeah.
Right. It just seems like it. And sometimes they're serious, and sometimes they're not so serious. But you have to get to the point where you're patching your devices as soon as you know about them. And I think most of these mobile device carriers and device manufacturers are getting better at issuing the 0-day patches faster and faster. So don't delay it, right? I get it. Somebody may not hack your phone within the next day or two, but if you forget to patch it and now you're a month out, I guarantee there's going to be a bunch of other people trying to scan, looking for the same vulnerabilities that had existed a month earlier or 2 months earlier.
Yeah. And so what I was actually thinking of as you were describing that is I read an article yesterday where they were talking about how 0-day exploits are being monitored very closely by threat actors. And what they're doing is they're pumping out ways to break in strictly with using like AI tools, or we'll just say they're using AI just to kind of simplify it, that they're using AI to keep an eye on what 0 days are available, how they're being exploited, and then pumping out malicious actions faster because of AI. So as businesses don't update or they don't enforce shorter like mean time to maybe resolution might be the word, or mean time to patching, if that's even a thing, I don't know. But if they're not doing that, then you have someone that is specifically looking for 0 days, specifically targeting people that fall within a category. And because they're using tools, they can do it at scale. So it's less of a, hey, we should just do this as a policy. It's more so, hey, we should do this because people are using advanced technologies now that they didn't have 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. And what do they, I mean, it's so cliche, but they say they have to be right once, right? And if they're doing it at scale and they have this volume that they're pumping out and they can do it faster because of the tools that they have, I think the onus is on the employers or security practitioners to kind of shorten the window or like shorten the runway. So
well, if it's a corporate managed device, yeah, that's totally doable.
Okay.
Right.
But that's probably maybe the point is as these threat actors become more advanced, right? As the tools that they're using become more advanced, the window to fix those issues shortens. Yeah. Or the runway rather.
Yeah, the window is closing in time for sure.
Yeah. So the longer you leave that door unlocked, the more likely somebody's going to walk through it because they can check the doors a lot faster.
Exactly.
We've seen them use AI to reverse engineer these patches even. So a 0 day is announced, like this new Apple 0 day, the attacker can actually take Apple's patch and then reverse engineer it with AI as well. So they can see what was patched and they can reverse engineer the attack that would take an exploit of that vulnerability. And then they can scan the internet at scale, as you mentioned, using other AI to find potential victims and then target those victims very quickly. So what we're seeing is this thing that used to take two to 3 weeks to weaponize a patch or a 0 day is now taking hours. And so they're able to take advantage of people, as you mentioned, Fern, who may be not patching quickly. And that was always the challenge between the CISO and the IT leader is we need to patch faster. Well, the IT leader is going to say, well, we have our patching protocols every 2 weeks, every month. And they're like, no, this is important. Something that's being actively exploited in the wild. We need to get on it right now. You have to really make some adjustments to do that quickly.
So to break that down a little bit and simplify it, what Troy just said is that the IT leader really wants to make sure that there's availability and does not want to introduce a brand new patch without testing. And so, but we as security leaders want to get that patch out as soon as possible because we are locking that door as fast as we can. And so now it's a balance of how fast can you patch it and maybe even test it before you start pushing it out. Because the last thing you want to do is push out a patch to 100,000 users and disable the entire workforce, right? That's the worst case scenario.
Or
maybe you can
millions
patch
of customers.
Or millions of customers, yeah. And so there's that process of trying to get these tested and pushed out as quickly as possible.
Okay. Well, not to doomsday it, but essentially maybe people, if they have the guardrails in place, depending on the impact of an exploit, you obviously have certain things that get patched sooner. right?
Yeah. And in Apple, we trust, right? Because they push that patch. I mean, if we're smart, we'd say, "Hey, Fern, update your phone first, because you don't have to worry. Like if you crash, we're good."
Yeah.
Right. So Fern, you text us when you're back online.
Yeah.
Right. And then Troy and I will update, because we just waited for you to see if you. But could you imagine if Apple pushed a botched patch and takes down all devices that patched?
Well, that's why I said companies, right? Because I was thinking of a very specific company that had a big issue last year around this time.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know the specifics on how that happened, but I think part of the outcome was they didn't do a geographical update, right? They just went blanket.
Yeah, and that wasn't a security patch. That was just a software update. But absolutely, starting with a small select user group in different geographies is the way to go, so you can make sure there's no issues.
Yeah.
Test it in dev and then push it to prod, right? Okay. Well, I think that's pretty good coverage for Apple and mobile devices, and kind of way businesses kind of think about security for devices. So let's get to remote workers, right? There are a lot of people that have to go into the office now that COVID is 5 years in the rearview mirror, but there's a lot of people that aren't. Like I went to Starbucks a couple of weeks ago thinking I'm going to go hang out at the Starbucks, have some coffee, and take out my laptop and do some things. Every single table was busy. And I'm just like, don't you guys have an office to get to? Like, aren't you guys supposed to be at an office somewhere? But obviously,
I've gone to the office only to jump on a Zoom call with like 5 people who are on different cubicles around me.
Oh, okay. So that's another option. But everyone's on a device, right? Whether they're at the office or they're remote. I just get frustrated when Starbucks is so packed that I can't even get a seat. And then I had to sit outside. So that I left very quickly. But every personal device, every laptop has a webcam, usually, right? The most annoying part, and I'm just going to say it, is when you log into a meeting with a very specific vendor, they automatically turn the camera on. That's an issue for me.
Turning on the camera?
Yeah, because sometimes you're not ready, right? I'm not ready to be on camera. Matter of fact, I don't even want to be seen, right? But maybe it's just a setting thing that I got to fix. But it seems like whenever I log into,
it's a setting.
Is it okay? Whenever I log in, like I literally go like this. I put my thumb over the camera and then I sign in. And then once I'm in, I turn off the camera because it just this is so annoying. So I have to go and fix the setting. But there's webcams on pretty much every device, right? And in this specific situation, they're talking about how webcams are getting hacked. If you have a Mac, you can't necessarily cover that because, you mentioned before we started recording, you can crack your screen.
Well, if they're too thick and it doesn't close all the way, so if you have it in your bag, it will crack the screen. But I mean, you can put some tape over it. Electrical tape's not going to really impede that.
No. Electrical tape will work pretty well too, I think.
Yeah, but this isn't new. Snowden called this out back in his complaints about the ability for people to turn on webcams and look at people through their webcam. Webcam hacks have been around forever and ever. So if you have one, you have the slider like I do on my laptop. I keep it slid closed. Or on my iPhone, I always make sure that you're looking for the little activation light on your phone to make sure that your camera's not on.
Okay. Well, so in this specific situation, what they're talking about is a specifically called BadCam, right? And in this exploit, it's flawed firmware that turns the essentially the device that you're using, where it can inject keystrokes and spread malware across the network because of the webcam. So I think in this example specifically, it talks about how and maybe this goes back to like patching, right? If the software that essentially runs that webcam has an exploit, how that can be leveraged to essentially break in. And then they name another one called Revault, right? Which is specific to another brand of laptops, but where they bypass the Windows login and still crypto keys. So
these are built-in webcams?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the first thing that comes to mind is the old USB plug-in webcams. Right.
Yeah, I think those are different. So these are webcams like on end devices. So like a, not personal, but like a laptop essentially, right?
Yeah. I think the USB ones had a lot of issues because typically people don't update the firmware on those. They're an external device and people forget to update firmware. Or it's not easy. And then the second part of that is we typically don't like to enable USB drives on corporate devices anyways, because those webcams sometimes act as a USB storage that could be injected with malware.
Okay.
So those are the plug-in ones. But if you're talking about the ones that are built in, it's a different story.
Well, I think why it's important is because specifically what this talks about is IoT devices. And as the reach of those, or the use, right, or we'll say, yeah, the reach of those kind of expands in the coming years, they're saying that as of 2025, IoT devices is reaching 20 billion, right? And why that's important here is not necessarily because an endpoint like a laptop could have a webcam issue, right? And that essentially increases the attack surface, right? Potential. So what this is now saying is that the implication is that hardware specific on a laptop could put your business at risk, right? It poses a risk because it increases the attack surface. But now when you look at it, well, if you just say hardware is hardware, that it then extends itself to IoT, right?
So I think this is a little bit different than IoT, the Internet of Things, or the devices that you plug in, like your Nest thermometer or your, smart toaster. But, one thing I did in my last role as CISO was to look at companies that secured things below the operating system. So this includes your audio drivers, your motherboard, your BIOS, your hardware drivers, your webcam driver, as an example. All of those things have firmware and updates that need to be applied. And sometimes we don't even realize that they're susceptible to a 0-day or an exploit that's being actively exploited, as you mentioned, Fern. And I think that applies here. A lot of people think about their operating system of Windows being the base layer, but there's a whole abstraction layer underneath that supports the communication between the hardware device to your computer and the software that sits on top of it. So your motherboard, hardware drivers, your display drivers, your keyboards, your mice, all that stuff that correlates in the BIOS could have potential vulnerabilities. And any one of those could be hacked to inject keystrokes or to listen to the stuff that the user is doing.
So how would someone do that for educational purposes, right? Like, I'm wondering, because if you're going after the BIOS, don't you have to get through the OS first, or at some point you have to kind of pass that layer? Because you said it's an abstracted layer, right? So when I think of when you say device drivers, if you're on a Windows device, you kind of go through the command prompt and you type in, forget the key, but essentially like the control panel. And then from there, you can see all your drivers, see all things connected to your device. But I exist in the OS when I see that.
Let me ask you this. When you get new firmware for that device, where are you getting it from? And is it trusted?
You get it from the internet usually.
Right. So back to where people are searching for applications for free. Well, people search for firmware.
But also on top of that, if the device is compromised in any way, so whether ransomware, some other malware, a browser malware, they can transit from, once they have control of the device in general, through another entry point. They can then traverse into all those other vulnerable systems. It's like a land and expand or a lateral movement from the operating system into the BIOS. And so, Fern, they can do it physically if they have possession of the device. It's very easy. Or if they've been able to hack in remotely through some other means, whether a phishing attack and you accidentally clicked on malware and they have access to your device that way, then they can start attacking that underlying infrastructure that we just really don't think about normally.
Yeah. Think about it. When I travel, I always think about this. Like, what do I do with my laptop in the hotel room? Or if I don't want to take it with me, where do I leave it? Is it secure? And then if you leave it in your hotel room, even if it's in the safe, is it really secure? So could somebody potentially go into your room and, put some malware on it or change hardware, or I don't know. I just think espionage, right?
Yeah, that's some real Jason Bourne type stuff.
Yeah.
I've never really worried about my laptop.
No,
I don't travel. I don't travel.
People who know me know this. So every time I travel, I set up a security camera in my room.
That only operates when you're gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now we know, and the world knows.
Well, I gotta find my room first, because maybe I don't use my real name.
Are you John Wick when you travel? I can confirm this. There is a camera that goes into place, which I think is kind of interesting because when we went to Black Hat, I had my laptop, I had my bag. The laptop wasn't cheap, right? It was a very expensive laptop. And my biggest concern is it wasn't fitting. It's not going to fit in the safe, but if I put it in the safe, I don't feel like it's safe anyways. So I never even used the hotel safes for that reason. But there's no way I'm carrying my backpack with my laptop in it, right? And I was thinking, man, like this really sucks because if someone breaks in, they're going to get a very good laptop at a minimum. And then I had all my camera stuff with me that was there as well. I mean, I easily could have had close to like 10 grand.
You're just worried about losing the device, but what if you're working for, I don't know, some really high level government three letter agency, and you're worried about intel data you might have on there, or maybe somebody putting malware on there that can intercept.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So for me, not necessarily a government target, right? I was more, like you said, more worried about the personal loss of having to recover, or not recover, but purchase again, which would really suck. But in your case, where you have the camera so you can kind of see, but
lost, but not lost.
Exactly.
So it's been compromised, but not lost. So now you trust it, but that's even more dangerous.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of leans into very socially engineered attacks, right? If someone's traveling, they know they're traveling and they know the room, they get into the room, the laptop isn't with them all the times, and they can put something on there, like you had mentioned, leave, and then the person comes back, grabs their laptop, and then all of a sudden, now they're walking around with a Trojan horse.
Yep.
Right? I think that's kind of what you're explaining. Is mine is more so loss aversion because of the financial impact to me personally, whereas threat actors could go after and target people.
Yeah, but that's the physical, like getting physical access to those devices. I've been in security a long time. I've gotten a lot of reports of lost laptops and people leaving them on airplanes, people forgetting them at TSA checkpoints. We see a lot of that, over the years. But it doesn't have to be a physical access to that laptop either. I think that's one way. What I was saying before is you could download some malicious drivers and install it yourself and not even know.
Yeah. So that kind of goes back to, we had talked about where people were using free software, right? And at the time it was a tool. I forget the name of the tool, but it was like a free RV Tools is what it was. RV Tools, and they were using essentially a malicious version of it. There wasn't the actual RV Tools, but maybe that's another thing too, is like with Google, there's a lot of times where you have malicious ads that hit the top of the list. So you're searching for something and like the top ad is actually like malicious sites. So if you...
Yeah, that happens with phone numbers too, right? If you're trying to call a bank or you're trying to call the airline, but you do a Google search for it, but it returns back an ad with the wrong number.
Yeah, and then
people don't really look into that. They just call it.
Yeah, because it's Google's right, top of the list, right? So that maybe that's like a whole nother topic, but I do find it interesting because what the root cause in all these situations is convenience, right? If it's convenient for someone to do something, they're probably going to do it. If it's not convenient, they're more likely to resist. So do you guys ever think about like security in that way? Is like, how can someone what is a more convenient way for someone to do something? And then what kind of risk does that pose to our business?
We are constantly thinking about ways to reduce user friction. That's the word we use for convenience or user friction. We want to make it easier for them to do the right thing. It's impossible to remove all friction and all inconvenience from security. It's just impossible, but we try to reduce it. So when I look at new vendors as an example, I look at what is this impact going to be to my end users, those who are not in technology, those who are not in cybersecurity. We need to be reducing that friction so that it's easier for them to do the right thing and to let this product work. There's sometimes when you buy a cybersecurity product, which is the best thing in the world for cybersecurity, but you deploy it and your users hate it, it's not going to be successful. It's not going to be successful. I'll use the old school DLP as an example. When it relied on the end user tagging and classifying documents, you could have the best DLP in the world, but if you have to rely on the end user to do it, it's not going to work. So that's why we've seen this whole progression of DLP into the new DSPM industry. So I think that's a big thing to think of, Fern. But to your point, you are spot on. Convenience is the key factor for usage. And so CISOs and security leaders are looking for a way to make it much easier for the end user.
Yeah. And maybe that's just another tangent topic is when you guys are evaluating tools, a lot of times there's a POC, right? And that requires the security teams to use the tool, see if they're going to like it. But what about when tools have to be used by an end user, like specifically software, right?
That's a great question. Like, how many times do you think a POC actually has a real end user using it to test it? Usually your proof of concept users are in the technology team and in the security team. They're the first ones to test all the new stuff. So it's easy for them because it's intuitive to a security person or to a technology person. But how about somebody in HR or finance or some other business department like sales, if that's what you do, that has no idea about technology? Yeah. Great question.
So this kind of comes from a conversation a couple of weeks ago where we talked UI UX design, right? Ease of use. So when you think of convenience and you think of user friction, right? Maybe a good topic for business leaders to explore is how well these tools integrate and how well they're we'll say working for the business outside of the small technology teams, right? Because if you can't get adoption outside of the technology teams, you kind of put yourself in a situation where you might not get the adoption you need, and then you don't see the ROI. And then like last week's episode where we talked about when you can't justify ROI, you're not going to get the outcomes you need because you can't justify the expense to the finance team, right?
I don't think there's two groups of that, because sometimes the tools should be seamless and invisible in a sense, but you still want to make sure that there is no impact to some of these users. So it's always a good idea to have that super user group that's outside of technology. And you may have a handful of people that are in different departments that are working in different applications that have different workflows that can help use the new technology, whether they know it or not, and give feedback directly.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's always a good part of any technology leader when they're going through a POC. It's not just how well does this work for our teams, is how well can this work for the broader business? And if it goes well, right, we're going to see the impact or not.
No impact, hopefully.
Yeah, no impact, but maybe we'll see it in better outcomes, right? When I say impact, I think more so like, did it go well? Do people use it? And if they're using it, can we justify the expense, right? But impact for you guys means different things clearly. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next one, right? Because we're kind of at a point where we don't want to get too far down and have a 2-hour episode. But this is again around hardware attacks, but specifically the ATM, right? Now you see a lot of card skimmers, right? You'll see a lot of things in the wild, like at a gas station, right? There's sometimes you go to a gas pump, except for me, because electric now. But there are sometimes you go to the pump, because we do have a truck, right? We go to the pump, and I remember seeing a sticker on there one time. Like, why the hell is there the sticker here? But then as I was pumping, I kept looking at it and thinking, like, that someone didn't put that sticker there. Like, that was there by someone that installed this. And then what I realized was it was there to protect any sort of, if someone were to take something like a skimmer and put it over, the sticker would be seen as like a broken seal, right? So it's kind of like a seal when you have food, is if you see it broken, do not consume if the seal is broken. And in a similar way is if you don't see the sticker fully, there is something that is obstructing that view, it's not a safe reader, right? But so specifically in this case, they're talking about a hacker gang use a 4G Raspberry Pi to plant a rootkit in a bank ATM network, right? So bypass the firewalls, spoof PIN checks, and essentially did fraudulent withdrawals. So maybe this is not necessarily relevant to everyone, but it does show the creativity that threat actors will have to get into different systems, right?
It's very interesting to me because when I was a kid, one of the things that I was dreaming about as I started getting into technology, I'm talking about in the mid 80s or early 90s, was the first Terminator movie with John Connor. And what did he do? He goes to the ATM, puts in this little card and types a few things and out spits the money that he goes to the mall with. I'm like, man, if that could be true, that'd be the best hack ever. But I think our ATM network is pretty secure. In this case, there are ways you can physically manipulate the ATM to get access to it. And skimmers are a big problem. But in this case, the malware deployment onto an ATM network is a little bit deeper into the systems, getting into the actual network of the ATM rather than taking physical advantage of the device itself. And so I think this was a bit more of a stark reminder of how vulnerable our infrastructure is around the country.
Yeah, two different things, right? Because that Raspberry Pi is essentially just stealing the network traffic. So it's a little different than the actual skimmer on the card reader itself.
Yeah.
But I mean, how many people actually go to an ATM anymore? We're pretty much all cashless.
Yeah, there's a lot of restaurants you go to and they say they're cashless. And it's like, wait a second. I have cash on me, right? But, now that I have an iPhone, just tap to pay kind of thing, which is very convenient, which I never used, by the way, before the iPhone. I never had done the Google Pay or Google Wallet, whatever they called it. But everything's set up on my iPhone now, right? It's for anyone out there, it scans my face. So you can't tap anything if I'm not present, right? But back to Troy's point is what it shows is how a physical device can compromise critical infrastructure. So I think it's just a reminder for businesses that have devices in the wild that could be interacted, whether it's like a retail location or where someone can walk up to something that is a network device, and how having those increases the risk, right? Or the attack surface of the business, right?
And Damian, I still use cash. I mean, Vegas is a big tipping town, so you got to have cash to tip valet and restaurants and things like that. But I will say that one rant I have is the new ATMs that the money comes outside, is where you have to actually reach into the ATM to get the money. Like if you remember when the money came out, it just spit it right out at you and you could just take the cash. Now you have to actually reach inside and it's like sideways, it's way down in there. It's like, did I get everything? Did I miss a bill or something like that? It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I like to use cash too when I'm in Vegas. I actually have a 2-account system. So I have an account that has just a little bit of money for ATM withdrawals, or if I want to pay by an ATM card versus credit card. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm traveling internationally, that's probably the card I'm going to use to withdraw local cash. But it's not connected to my main bank account. Like you can't get to my main bank account. And that main bank account, we almost never use an ATM.
Yeah, you probably don't have a card, right? You probably don't have online banking for it, right? Yeah. Because the only way you're going to get money out is if you go into a store. Well, not a branch. Yeah. Go into a branch. You have to have your ID usually, right? And you have to signature verify. So
figure Damian, your next life or your next podcast should be a financial one. You're going to teach people how to, save money and do it right and have the right accounts in the right places to maximize money. I think that I would follow you for sure.
I would too. But I think maybe a part of me kind of already has the same mentality, because if you walk around with a debit card and someone has your PIN, they're going to get at least $500, a couple thousand, depends on your limit with the ATM, right?
Yeah, and there's limited protection versus a credit card.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like if you have any sort of fraudulent activity on a credit card, the protection that you have as a consumer on that credit card are way better than they are if they get into your bank account. Granted, if someone wires $1 million out of your account and that gets through, it's a little bit harder to get it back. But assume that you have a card with a high limit. If someone is spending $100,000 or $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever it is, if you say it came out of my bank account versus it came out of a credit card, you're more likely to be protected on the credit card front.
Well, just like we've said, we've been clear, I do not have Bitcoin, and nor do I have $1 million sitting in my bank account, Fern. So
yeah,
I'm not a target. Those of you guys listening.
Me either. But I think it is a good reminder for people to think of is if you have, you shouldn't always just, you know what's interesting about this is you're kind of separating you essentially separate the risk, right? Where you limit the exposure you have on your, say, a significant amount of funds, whether it's 1,000, 10,000 or 100,000, whatever it is. And you have another portion where you might have a few $100 in the account. So if you think of it in terms of business, you could have a vault, right? Where all your secrets go, your IP goes and things like that. And then you have just kind of a OneDrive out there in the wild, right? And you protect things differently based on the impact that it would have to you from a personal standpoint, but also from a business standpoint, to where you kind of separate into these different categories where you could have a severely negative impact. Like if someone were to get your IP and then sell that in the open market, or if they just log into, Peggy's HR device, they might get some good information, but it may not necessarily bring down the business. So I think in business, people do these same things. And if you're listening, maybe doing that in your personal life is something, if you haven't done it, is something that's worth doing. Because if someone were to steal your only bank account information and they were to get into your only checking account or your only savings account, it's not going to end up well. If they can get that far, it's not going to end well for you. But if you can separate it and reduce the risk by maybe not having a debit card to the account that has the large sums of money, you're going to be less prone to disaster. Right? I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, so back to the conversation with, you mentioned this, where organizations may have these branches, or they may have similar, right? Not necessarily ATMs, because you don't have to be a bank. We could monitor for anomalies on the network.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things you have to be really conscious of, what normally happens on that. I won't say ATM for the ATM network. Could be a POS. It could be just a branch office. What's normal activity for that branch office? And is there anything abnormal happening? And the faster you can react to it, faster you can detect it, the quicker you can remediate. Because somebody could just drop one of these Raspberry Pis onto your network and then intercept the traffic. And now, are you at risk? So it's not just ATMs, right? I've seen pen testers do this. They will just drop a Raspberry Pi and it doesn't even need to be plugged in. It could just be listening to wireless activity.
So I've got a kind of question for you guys. The flippers. So I forget, you were I believe you were in the Philippines, right? Yeah. And you were at Jollibee Chicken. Some of the best chicken you're going to have.
My favorite chicken.
Right? And what I like about that place is like they have like spaghetti. It's like I would have chicken and waffles. Okay, chicken and spaghetti, or not necessarily spaghetti, but the noodles, right? But back on topic, when you were in line ordering your food, there was a kid that had the flipper, right? What I'm wondering is, a lot of businesses use RFID. A lot of businesses use some sort of like wireless transmission of a signal for access. Like, when you use those sorts of devices, it's a physical device in the wild, kind of like an ATM for a bank, but now it provides access to physical building, right? How do you account for the risk around like someone having a flipper where they just take it, potentially the signal, right, and recreate it, and then start a car, open a door, right? Like, how do you necessarily account for that?
I think it's the same way you would prepare for any cyber attack. You assume breach, you look for the second and the third level of the next activity, right? So for malware, as an example, you may miss the initial phish and the employee clicks and it downloads the malware, and then you're going to start seeing it try to move laterally or make calls back like a beacon or something. So you're looking for all the signals. And the same thing with a Flipper Zero. I mean, these tools can do so many things. It can replicate an RFID. It can do an near field contact. It can do all that stuff. And so you may miss that. If it if it captures your garage door signal, and then you push the button and they get in your, they look for the motion of your garage door going up. I have a smart garage door, so I can see if it goes up, and I want to look to see who's in my garage, right? So you kind of have to think about, we may miss that first one because it's almost invisible. Then we have to see what's going to be next in the second and third and fourth levels of any attack, no matter what it is.
Yeah, so security and layers. And as you were saying that, Troy, I was thinking, like, I have the same thing on my phone where I can't get into my house if my phone's dead. Just simple as that, right? That's why I carry a spare charger. But if my phone is dead, I can't get into my house because I don't ever, I don't have the.
So what you're saying, if you want to get in the Fern's house, you got to steal his phone?
Basically, yeah. But not quite, because the garage door is locked, right? And when Troy mentioned that, I thought, oh, the garage door goes up, you see a sensor, maybe there's a camera. But as long as the garage door is locked, layer 2, or a layer of security, right? I'm safe, except for what's in my garage. So again, when it comes to physical devices in the wild, it's not as simple as, oh, if they get in, everything's ruined, scorched earth scenario. It's just, as long as you plan for these things and you set up layers and look out for certain activity in layers, you're less prone to someone getting as far as they would otherwise, right? Because I think some people outside of security just assume that if something's in place, you're protected. But I think as you understand security better, it's not, well, we locked the door, or we locked this, or we locked that. It's, well, if this defense falls, what else do we have backup for that? And if that falls, how do we mitigate that risk?
But also, how fast can you detect that one of those layers has been breached?
Yeah.
And how quickly can you respond? Because those layers will slow down an attacker. But if they have all the time in the world with no response and you don't even know they're there, there's a higher chance they're going to get through all those layers.
That's a great point, Fern. And you mentioned it, like, we hear this all the time. How could this have happened? There's no silver bullet in cybersecurity. We're building resilience. We're building the ability to recover from something happening. We're not building a wall that says nothing is ever going to happen. And so many times when a business has a breach, those folks who have not practiced tabletops or executive leadership discussions are going to be looking at you saying, how could this have happened to us? I thought we spent $400 million to $1 billion on cybersecurity last year. How could this happen? And the simple answer is that you cannot prevent every single attack. You have to build defense in depth, and you have to have resilience to be able to recover quickly. And as Damian mentioned, be able to see it very rapidly so that you can recover.
There's a lot of things with security that I don't think people realize. And the fun part about this is talking with you guys. I feel like I'm learning so much more about security. So I might just be above average Fern real soon.
I got some friends who are pen testers, or really good pen testers. We should bring them on as a guest to talk about, some of the crazy stories they have about actual pen testing, physical and network.
And then they can do a live pen test on me. Like, break into my phone and open my garage. Go. I probably could, right? Okay. Well, I think that kind of sums up for the this week's episode. As usual, I'd like to go around the room and ask if there's any closing thoughts that maybe we haven't talked about, or just like a quick summary.
No, I think the main topic here really was patch your phone, right? Make sure that you don't have vulnerabilities sitting out there. We get these 0-day alerts. Make sure they're patched on time. If your security administrator, IT administrator puts on a time to patch, try to get those done as soon as possible, because you want to close the window of opportunity for these attackers. But yeah, otherwise, great conversation this week.
Troy.
Oh, it was great. And one thing that really resonated with me for this week was, highlighting the things below the operating system, the BIOS, the hardware drivers, the webcam driver, all the stuff that you may not be thinking about that you should be.
And I'll say this, I have 2 kids, and there's a lot of things I tell them not to do. And they don't always understand or agree with me, but there's always a reason, right? Whether jumping off the stairs with socks on to a hardwood floor and slipping and busting their head, like happened today. She didn't hit her head, but I told her, like, hey, don't ever jump off the stairs onto this floor with socks ever again. Just don't do it. And she's like, well, why? Right? And I think it goes back to the point of if something is being required of you or asked that isn't convenient, which happens a lot in security, because we could be honest, not everything is convenient. There is usually a reason behind it. You may not understand it. You may not necessarily care about it, but it's going to be important to the business for some reason. And if, as long as the business has it in place, think of it like the hazards on coffee. People have burned themselves because they didn't realize that the coffee was hot and it would burn, right? Just like a caution label on anything, there was a lawsuit behind that had that put up in place. And security in a lot of ways is very similar, where there is a risk of something, or there is a form of risk, and that these things are put in place to prevent that. So don't look at it as security telling you can't do it. They're just preventing things from happening and going down the line further that could put your job at risk, right? And I think with that, that's my closing thoughts. We'll see you next week. Until then, be safe.